God is in his holy tent. Earthly thoughts, be silent now.
For Dad, it's a bargain.
In the exploration of the curse surrounding the production of the Poltergeist franchise, besides the obvious tragic loss of life, there is one other thing that has been undeniably true. This group of actors were all multi-talented and very passionate about the pursuit of their dreams. And if there was one way to describe Julian Beck, it would be as a perpetual dreamer. Beck was a bold, innovative, and avant-garde figure in the theater world, credited with revolutionizing playwriting and acting in the 1950s and 1960s. He was an actor, writer, producer, director, and painter, known for his quirky and odd appearance. His hollow eyes, stark and skull-like features made him intriguing to look at, and his gift and talent for the arts left others intrigued to know more about him. Julian Beck lived his life dedicated to art and acting, and some would argue that his passion in life would be the very cause of his death.
Let me in. Let's talk about it. Let me in.
Julian Beck was born on May 31st, 1925, in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan in New York, to parents Irving and Mabel Lucille. Very little has been documented of his childhood, but it is said that he always had a vivid imagination, and in a story retold by family members, by the time he was 4 years old, he was frequently transforming his childhood apartment into an imitation circus. As a teenager, he would attend Horace Mann School and quickly found himself at home in the theater department, taking part in many of the school's performances. He would follow his time at Horace Mann with a brief stint as a student at Yale University. However, he would quickly abandon academia to pursue his passions for writing and art. His first experimentation into the creative arts would be as an abstract painter in the 1940s. However, it would be in 1943 when his pathway to the arts would be further fueled by his introduction to actress, writer, and director Judith Malina. Sparks would immediately fly, and the pair would fast become inseparable, marrying in October of 1948, after putting their similar passions together to co-found the Living Theater in 1947. The couple's subsequent contributions would be credited with propelling the off-Broadway movement and the innovations of performance art. The Living Theater, located in New York City, also shared its philosophy throughout the world, performing extensively in non-traditional spaces, ranging from street corners to prisons. Beck's philosophy of theater carried into his life. When speaking of his intentions with the Living Theater, he was quoted as saying, "We insisted on experimentation. There was an image for a changing society. If one can experiment in theater, one can experiment in life." Beck never shied away from speaking his mind and lived his life open and proudly. Political activism played a crucial role for Beck, both within and outside of his theater world. Art was about making a statement, and if the initial shock of his performances that he took place in led to real conversation, then all the better, and it would all be worth it. Not that his performances were always appreciated or even understood. During his career with the theater troupe, he and Malina would be jailed no less than 12 times in 3 different countries for various acts of civil disobedience and counts of indecent exposure. Their works for the Living Theater were distinguished for their harrowing realism and their fervent attempt to break down the so-called fourth wall, separating the actor from the audience. They were dedicated to engaging the theatergoers in the experience, not just as a front-row seat, but actually a part of the show being told. In one particular performance in which the actors were portraying junkies, They would at one point stumble out into the audience, asking the patrons for money for their next fix. Beck's devotion and dedication to realism within the living theater had many young hopeful actors clamoring to join its ranks. For those who were a part of the troupe, it truly became a family affair, as many would include their children in performances that called for a youthful portrayal. And this would also extend to Beck and Melina's own children, Garrick and Isha. The world would also have the living theater and Julian Beck to thank for its introductions to what has become one of the most celebrated actors of our time, as one of its most famous alums is Al Pacino. Besides his theater work, Beck published several volumes of poetry reflecting his left-wing anarchist beliefs, 2 non-fiction books, and a handful of experimental and mainstream films. His intense and imposing acting style and commanding presence was captured vividly in his film roles, including a sadistic gangster, and, of course, his portrayal in the film that brings us all here, Poltergeist 2. The film that would be his last. However, the world would have one last glimpse of Julian Beck as his previously recorded guest appearance on Miami Vice would air, a mere 13 days after his death.
Now, before it's too late. You're gonna die in there.
Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, would begin principal photography in May of 1985 in Los Angeles. The sequel would be directed by Brian Gibson, with a screenplay written by Michael Grays and Mark Victor, with all of the original principal cast reprising their roles. All, except for Dominique Dunne. Julian Beck, making his debut to the franchise with its sequel, would be predominantly featured during the 1 hour and 31-minute runtime as the haunting antagonist, Reverend Henry Kane. Kane, also referred to as the Beast, was in life the opposite of what you would assume from a man named Reverend Henry Kane. For while he was a priest, he was also the leader of a satanic cult in the 19th century. His views of the world were aggressively apocalyptic. He found an underground cave system and convinced his followers to join him in its depths, to be sealed off from the world, under the guise of salvation and retreat from the failing world. Kane and his apocalyptic congregation would remain within the caves until it turned from a home to a grave, as one by one they would all perish. The location of the cult's mass grave would be the very land used for the construction of the Cuesta Verde neighborhood, with Ground Zero being at the exact location of the Freeling home. As we witnessed in the first film, the construction of this neighborhood would stir up those spirits, as the crew was instructed to remove the headstones and leave the bodies. However, unbeknownst to the construction crew, there were also some additional remains buried far beneath the surface in secret, remains with no headstones to warn of their dark deeds in life, one of which was none other than the aforementioned Reverend Henry Kane. Beck's portrayal of the devious Reverend with the terrifying obsession with the life force of the youngest Freeling child, Carol Ann, is near perfect in its creepy delivery. Beck toes the line between caring Reverend in his attempts to ingratiate himself into the lives of the Freelings to downright chilling as his efforts fail. It is a disservice to his haunting performance that it is not more widely recognized and acclaimed for its brilliance. When we think of classic horror villains, I've never been able to understand why more people don't include Reverend Kane in the conversation. Beck had a unique ability to submerge and immerse himself fully in the characters he portrayed, and watching the film again and researching for this series, I developed an even greater respect for his acting ability. Especially looking back in retrospect, knowing what I know now, and knowing the pain he must have been enduring throughout filming. But when you love what you do, pain is just mind over matter, and no illness or curse can prevent the work from being done.
And now a word from our sponsors. VENATOS
is in our hands. It's left to us, guys. And we gotta do something with it.
Anyone who's been a part of the Press Start family for any amount of time knows that I truly appreciate and value the relationship that I have with today's sponsor, VENATOS. They are truly an outstanding company with great quality products that I can truly get behind and put my stamp of approval on. Their customer service is absolutely hands down some of the best on the marketplace. If you reach out to them for any reason, your emails are typically responded to within hours, not days, hours. And not only do they promise to make it right, they promise to make it better. And as a thank you for your support, they are offering a 10% discount on any orders if you use the code PressStartMom at checkout. They do ship internationally, including Canada, and 100% stand by the quality of their products. And so do I. Thank you, VENATOS, for sponsoring this video, and thank you to all of you for checking out VENATOS. Let's get back to the video. In late 1983, Julian Beck would be diagnosed with progressive stomach cancer. But for the stubborn and driven actor, he would not allow his diagnosis to slow him down. Post his cancer diagnosis, Beck would continue to work, appearing in the films The Cotton Club and 9.5 Weeks, along with a guest starring role as J.B. Johnston in an episode entitled Prodigal Son on the hit show Miami Vice, ending his career with his last film role being Poltergeist 2. Some would argue, not a good career choice. But the inevitability of life would persist, and the cancer, or the curse, depending on what you believe, would come for Julian Beck, and on September 14th, 1985, he would pass away at the age of 60 at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. His death would come before post-production would be completed on Poltergeist 2, and producers would bring in voice actor Corey Burton to loop some of Beck's lines. The film would be released on May 23rd of 1986, and would go on to gross $75 million. In the New York Times obituary published on September 17, 1985, Samuel G. Freeman writes, Julian Beck, whose living theater expanded the frontiers of theatrical innovation for nearly 40 years, died of cancer Saturday at Mount Sinai Hospital. The living theater, which Mr. Beck founded in 1947 with his wife Judith Molina, was one of the most influential and long-lasting companies of the avant-garde movement. I think, if we will look at this world as it really is, Mr. Beck wrote in 1965, we will find that even what is most ugly has within it the sparks of life. And I think we go to the theater to glimpse those sparks. That's why we get so excited before we go to the theater. It's because we are looking for light in a very dark world.
Pleasure visiting with you as we call upon his name, aiding every good intent, guiding us onward ever.
There can be no doubt that Julian Beck had an immense love, passion, admiration, and respect for theater and the arts. He pushed a narrative of inclusivity and love. He stood for bravery and a refusal to back down from what he believed to be true. Our voices are our power. Our words, our strength. When you use your voice in pushing for what is right and what is just, then the battle for openness comes closer to being realized. It is a battle that continues today, and his message is no less valid and important. We owe it to his legacy to continue speaking up for what is right. We all must go forward in love and be brave enough to stand tall in our resolve. Whether or not there is any real legitimacy to the speculation of a curse being the root cause of the many tragedies that would plague the cast and crew, we will never really know. But if we take nothing else from the legacy of the stars of Poltergeist 2, it is to live each day to the fullest and to never compromise. Free speech in theater has come a long way, and if one person could be pointed to as someone who would be proud of those strides, it would be the very man that we also owe a great deal of thanks to as a pioneer of those changes, allowing for greater freedom in theater. All the world's a stage, and we can thank Julian Beck for a part of that. Thank you so much for joining me in the latest chapter of our cursed journey. I'm so grateful to all of you for taking the time and for continuing to come back. If you enjoyed today's video, I hope you'll give it a like and consider joining me. And of course, I have to extend once again a thank you to VENATOS for sponsoring this video and for their continued support of the channel. Times can be dark, but, pun intended, together we can find the light. Until next time, take care of yourselves and, of course, one another.